Hello, hello everyone. It's me, Arden Lee. I'm back today with another video, and today's video is going to be about what to do when you've started a project and maybe you're even most of the way through it, but then you're having a hard time finishing it. We're going to talk about a couple things that you can do to get back in that state of inspiration so that you can complete what you started. Before I get into that talk, however, as always, I would love to invite you to subscribe to my channel or like my page, depending on which platform you're seeing this video on. And if you're not already familiar with me and my work, my name is Arden Lee, and I am the creator of the Repatterning Project. That is an 8-week course where we hack our beliefs, we backwards engineer our results, and we clear all the obstacles out of our way through bringing conscious mindfulness to our everyday choices so that we can fast track ourselves on that path to success, happiness, personal growth, and self-improvement. So if that sounds like something you're into, go ahead and check out the links that I have left you in the description box. The first link you're going to find is to a free PDF guide that you can download to learn more about the Repatterning Project. And there's also a link to the Repatterning Parlor, which is a Facebook group that I moderate full of like-minded individuals who are also fast-tracking their own paths towards success. So go ahead and check that out if that's your jam. We'd love to see you join us. All right, so let's talk today about what you can do if you've gotten into a project and all of a sudden you feel like you're not inspired to do it anymore. You're feeling like, no matter what, you just can't sit down and write that final chapter or move forward. Sometimes in playwriting, I don't know if you guys knew this, but I actually studied playwriting as sort of I studied theater and writing when I was at NYU, so playwriting was like one of the classes I took, and we used to refer to this as second act problems. People would be like, oh, you're having second act problems. Like, oh, first act, great, like, got that all done, and now, there's second act problems. So what do you do if this is the issue that you've been having? Well, the first thing that I would love to invite you to do is to start thinking about what conditions need to be present for you to feel inspired to get work done. One of the things that really works for me is if I have coffee with a friend, and especially if I have coffee with a friend who I can talk to about the project that I'm working on. Because when I do that, first of all, the coffee helps because there's caffeine involved. So certainly I can notice when the substances that I'm putting into my body make me feel a certain way, right? If I wanted to do something, something that requires a lot of energy or requires thought or inspiration, then coffee is going to work great for me, right? If what I want is to relax and go to sleep, then coffee is not going to be something I want. This sounds really simplistic, but how often do we think about backwards engineering what we do in order to arrive at the state that we need to be in to create the results that we want, right? So sometimes something as simple as just looking at what you're putting in your body and how it's making you feel can help you get to that state. And the other reason that I love to have coffee with a friend before I work on something is that inevitably I'll talk to that friend about the project because we'll ask each other like, hey, what are you working on lately? Like what's inspiring you or what have you. And when I repeat what I'm working on to the friend who's listening to me, then I get re-inspired by it and I remember why I'm doing it in the first place. A friend of mine, Zach Smith, who's an artist and also a writer, a journalist, he once described he was going to a convention at a hotel, and it was like 4 in the morning, and he's sitting at this hotel bar in Vegas, and he's trying to explain the premise of his article to a stranger at the bar next to him who he said barely spoke any English. He's like, if you want to remember why you're writing a piece again, try sitting at a bar at 4 in the morning and explaining it to a stranger who barely speaks the language that you speak, and you'll probably remember what the piece was supposed to be about in the first place. So having someone that you can talk to, whether it's a friend you're having coffee with or explaining it to a stranger at a bar at 4 in the morning, whatever works for you, is going to be a great way to remember why you started working on that thing in the first place. So that's the first thing to note. Another thing that can be helpful is to go back and read or watch your project, what you have of it so far, from the very beginning. So for me, if I'm working on a manuscript, if I am having trouble knowing where it's supposed to go forward from wherever I've stopped, if I go back and I read the whole thing through from the beginning again, that actually gives me some clarity on what the next step is. So if this is, a film that you're working on, or, any kind of creative project with narrative, especially, something with a timeline to it, perhaps if it's a painting, this technique might not work quite as well. But anything that has a timeline to it, anything that has a through line, going back from the beginning and reviewing everything that you've done so far can be really super helpful, and it can remind you what that next step is that you want to take from there. And finally, another really good thing to ask yourself is, if you're really having trouble sitting down and completing something, it's possible that this is not the project that you actually intended to create. It's possible that you had a great idea, but then when you sat down and you went to work on it, the execution of it wasn't exactly what you thought it would be. Or perhaps you started it when you were in a different place, and now that no longer feels relevant to you. For me personally, I have 80,000 words of a memoir sitting on my computer that I haven't touched in years, because there have been other things that were more pressing, that were more important, and I have an idea for a book that I intend to write pretty soon that I think will actually be about half the length of the draft that I have that's not even finished, but which is more relevant to where I am right now, and it's entirely possible that I may pick up the other project at some point in the future when it feels more right for me. But at this point, we do get to ask ourselves, like, is this worth finishing what I started? And it can be really difficult sometimes because we get so invested in the things that we have attachment to, and I understand that, because there are so many people out there who start things that they don't finish, and we often don't want to become one of those people. We want to follow through on the things that we say that we're going to do. At the same time, however, we don't want to throw good money after bad either. So it's sort of like if you were going to the grocery store and you're driving to the store and you're halfway there, and all of a sudden you realize that the store is closed, there would be no reason to keep driving the other half of the journey to get to there if you realize that that's not where you want to be in the first place. It's a better idea to just turn back around at that point. So that may or may not be where you're at. And finally, the last thing I would say is, in addition to being able to talk out your ideas with someone in a way that re-inspires you, what can also be really helpful is to enlist a friend whose opinion you trust and who has your best interests at heart, and ask them to lend their fresh pair of eyes to whatever it is that you're working on. If you have someone who's willing to read through what you've written so far and give you some constructive feedback on it, or tell you what they love about it, why it's important to you, why it's important that this work comes out in the world as a whole, then you're going to feel re-inspired by that and remember why you wrote it to begin with. And they may also be able to give you some constructive feedback on what they feel your next logical step should be. Sometimes, especially when we get into lengthy projects, especially with writing, you guys, especially writing a book or writing a thesis, whatever it happens to be, when we get into these long, lengthy, there's so much information to hold. Sometimes it can be difficult for us to find clarity, to see the forest for the trees, right? It's like the forest is our whole work and the trees are all the little individual words, and we get so caught up in crafting each, separate word and sentence, and sometimes it's hard for us to zoom out. So if you get someone else who has a fresh pair of eyes to look at it and tell you what they feel the next logical step for you should be, then that can often help you take action as well. So those are a few ideas for what to do if you are in the middle of a project, or perhaps toward the end of a project that you're wrapping up and you're finding it difficult to find inspiration. And I totally get that. And I think one last thing I'll say about this too is that I have not personally found it to be helpful to force myself to work when I'm not inspired. I'll say that again because I think that's important. I have not personally found it helpful to force myself to work when I'm not inspired, because what that actually does is it anchors that feeling of frustration and like that Sisyphean, like pushing a rock up the side of a mountain kind of feeling to my very workspace and to the project itself. So if I actually wait and let the dust settle and try to do those other things that are going to spark that inspiration in me and feel excited to go and sit down and work, then that feels really great. The only exception I'll say to that is that sometimes it's difficult and it feels frustrating or it feels uninspiring until I've just sat down and typed the first sentence. So what I would say about that actually is see if you can, if you're feeling like you need, like the inspiration isn't coming and you want to try and force yourself to work, I would say force yourself just to write one sentence. And then after that one sentence, decide if you want to write another one. And sometimes if you just have that one sentence in you and that's it, that's all you have for the day, then cool, you know, sometimes the muse doesn't show up, right? But if you sit down and you write that one sentence and you're already at your desk and you've got your coffee next to you or whatever it is that you choose to drink, and you're sitting there and you write one sentence, sometimes the next sentence just comes because you write one and you know what the next one is. And then the next one comes and the next one comes. And the next thing you know, it's like 12 hours later and you're, starving and you're, that's actually not a great habit. I can't lie though. I've definitely been that person. So when I last finished the screenplay, I wrote the last like 36 pages in like 24 hours straight. And I was just up the whole time. So anyway, so those are my tips for how to complete a project that you're feeling like you might have lost inspiration on. I hope this was helpful and I will see you in the next video.